What a day, what a day.
Hi there, thank you very much for having me speak today. I've been told that I don't need to lean too much into this microphone, so I'll try not to, and thank you. Anyway, as has already been said, I'm the regional coordinator for Unite Against Fascism. I also co-chair something called Newcastle Unite, so if you was out against Kebede in February, that had something to do with me, as well as many other people. As has been said, I was in Calais last week as a part of a Stand Up to Racism delegation. And there's our logo there. We are trying to get this launched in the northeast and bring out more people from Calais, from here to Calais. We had a fantastic visit. It was, if I could describe it, Calais and the jungle in one word, I'd just say it's a very extreme place. In one sense, you know, there is extreme deprivation. People are really struggling in the sense that, you know, they've travelled continents, they've escaped war and so on. But on the same hand, it's also really encouraging because you're seeing people in Calais from all over the world living together in some sort of community. They've come up with a barter economy where there's little shops and things like this where people can trade things. And one thing that they did really sort of appreciate was us going out there, not with loads of sort of clothes or anything like that. I mean, we did take money for the charities, but just going out there and just to say that they are welcome here, you know, that they are, you know, welcome in this society, and despite what the government and the state might say about them, you know, the ordinary people are on their side. That sort of brings me on to, you know, quite a nice start actually. I want to contextualise this. I was asked to speak about unity and tackling racism, which I will do, but I want to sort of, I want to get an idea of what people think racism is. I mean, does anyone want to offer some sort of contribution? What's racism to them, and how long's it been around? Does anyone want to stick up a hand anywhere? Yeah.
I think racism is not just about colour as well. It's about people in different classes that they used to have, like a lot frequently that's been around in the UK, like middle class, working classes. It's not just about colour. It's about the class system that they used to quite frequently doing in the UK previously, but not anymore though. But I don't know whether they still do that. So
I'd completely agree with you. I'd say that racism and class are two things that intertwined completely. The two are unavoidable. So, you know, often, you know, if you look at Barack Obama, of course he suffers racism, but I doubt he suffers the racism that many of us here sort of face. Now, obviously, there's Islamophobia. I'd completely agree that is racism. That is racism without doubt. As a non-Muslim, though, I'm not going to come here and tell you about your experience. I'm sure you sort of, you know exactly what it is, don't you? Far better than me. Does anyone have any sort of concept of how old racism is, when it really took off, you know?
Time has started, you know, tribes would fight each other.
Yeah.
Propaganda against them, they're bad, it's bad. It's time to start.
So you think, it's interesting that people often think that it's something that's come from very early on in human history, something that's really, but you know, I would say that racism's perhaps something that is to do with a system almost on a global level. So racism's really taken off, and while there was prejudice, definitely, and sort of suspicion of difference, I sort of disagree with this idea that it's sort of something fundamental, it's always been around. I mean, does anyone sort of think it is human nature that we're just intrinsically racist? Because that's a good start, you know, because, you know, as we know with children and things, that there isn't you know, we don't see much racism. This for me is where racism really kicks off. We've got definitely suspicion of each other, but racism is the denial of rights based on some sort of inherited characteristic, mainly sort of colour, okay? And this is where it really kicks off on a global scale. I mean, if you look at ancient Greece and ancient Rome, they had a lot of slaves, definitely, but these were often captors of war, things like that. It's really through the slave trade that you see the systematic denial of rights of a big group of people based on the colour of their skin. Now, does anyone have any ideas why do you think this was sort of developed, where the racism, because I'd say, does anyone have any ideas about that in terms of like where the racism came from? Does anyone? Yeah.
I believe that racism, as you said, that came from captives of war, so they were slaves. For example, in Arabia, in the Arab countries, slaves were Persians or white or black. In, for example, Ethiopia, the slaves were white, Arabs, Persians, and in Europe the races were Persians, Arabs, and black people. But with the triangle commercialization of slaves, then there were hundreds of, during a lot of time, the only slaves were just black. So then that came with the concept that through generation that yes, I've seen the black people, they are the slaves.
Yeah, so they're inferior. Yeah.
Continuing of children growing up in generations, only seeing the color black to be below them. So then they created that idea.
Good.
Yes.
That's spot on. That is perfect. Basically, we've got slavery 300 years ago. Now, what's happening is there's a fastly growing world, okay, and there is, the onset of capitalism, right? So you've got a fastly growing world, and they need cheap labour to run that. And obviously, slavery was, the best way for them to get cheap labour. Now, there was sort of indentured labour before, where actually white criminals would be tied over to a landowner, and they would have to sort of work there for a significant period of time, and then they'd be released. However, what was happening in the plantations and things like that was actually the black workers and the white workers were sort of starting to unite, and that wasn't very good for those at the top who were wanting to keep that system in place. So what happened was, the white workers would start to get paid, and then we'd keep the black slaves. So what happened was a sort of development of racist taxonomies that black people were inferior, and you've got to bear in mind that this was also to sort of reconcile the public mind. Obviously, there's 6 million slaves being taken from Africa to the West Indies, to the Americas and stuff, and ordinary white people found that hard to deal with as well. So what you ended up with is this development of racist ideas. So it comes from very much the top down, and that's something that I really want to sort of make clear in the talk, that racism today is very much, it's not that working class people are racist, because I don't believe that for one bit. Racism very much comes from the top down, not the bottom up, and it serves a real purpose, and it's something that we really need to be aware of when we sort of talk about fighting racism and things like that. Okay, does anyone know who that is? No? Mark Duggan, yeah, that's right. The reason I've actually brought Mark Duggan, I didn't want to come here and talk too much about Islamophobia and things. If you were at the festival, you'd have seen Carol, Mark's auntie there. She was invited along, we know them, and things like that. Mark Duggan's actually quite special to me because it was, I was confronting the far right quite young, and then I sort of took a bit of a break from it. And it was really after what happened after the Duggan shooting that got me really active in political activity and things like that, and anti-racism work. Okay, did people know what happened sort of after the Mark Duggan shooting?
Yeah, they bashed his knees up.
Yeah, they shot him and... pardon?
They shot him down and then they bashed up his knees. He was a young girl. She was like a young, or someone in his family.
That's right, yeah. Well, I'll you've got good knowledge of what's going on there. So what we had is we've got a young man, he's 29 years old, the same age as me now. He's travelling through London in a minicab, and the police from a police command unit called Operation Trident. It's a thing set up specifically for black-on-black crime, which is something that I sort of, find peculiar. If you look at Glasgow, which is one of the most violent cities in the world, in Europe, there's no sort of police unit specifically for white-on-white crime. So, you get a sort of an idea of where this racism's coming from. It's coming from, it's feeding this sort of racist idea at a state level. He was shot and killed. And in the immediate aftermath, it was widely reported that he was a gangster. Now, Mark Duggan only had sort of a petty criminal record. He was certainly not known for being, some mid-career criminal. That was put out by not only the ICE piece, by the media, but the IPCC, which is the Independent Police Commission. they said that, you know, he had been shot. He was armed with a gun and he had shot an officer. Now, the IPCC had to actually retract that statement because it wasn't true. The bullet that was lodged in the officer's radio was actually from the officer that was shooting the gun. Now, not surprisingly, the Mark Duggan's family wanted answers, and they went to the police station with about 200 supporters, and they were pretty much ignored. As you can imagine, you know, they were demanding answers, and they wanted to see someone quite similar, and that was very much denied. And a peaceful protest boiled over after a 16-year-old girl who threw something at them was allegedly sort of roughed up and stuff, and what we saw was riots throughout the country. So what we saw is sort of stereotypes coming from the media that he's a mid-career gangster. We see stereotypes coming from the police. You know, they've just assumed that he's fired a gun, despite there being no gun on his person. It was, you know, it was in the court, you know, sort of said that he'd thrown it away and things like that. He was completely unarmed and stuff. And we see the use of stereotypes to sort of perpetuate this idea that the state is in the right. Now, the scale of the debates did really command a political response, but there was very little. The scale of the riots demanded a political response, but there was very little sort of willingness to take the side of the Duggan family or anything like that. David Cameron sort of said this was just criminality, pure and simple. Any sort of debate around it was shut down. They didn't want to sort of engage in sociological justifications or anything like that, and that was quite hypocritical, I think, because, you know, saying that, you know, it's criminality and that's it, and they're looters and they're just, you know, scoundrels. It was quite hypocritical when you think that in the run-up to that there was the expenses scandal where the politicians were taking all of the money off of the people's taxes and stuff like that. So what happened was, the riots were really racialised in the media. It was sort of told to be it was a black problem, these are black people. There was a guy called David Starkey who said that even the white people involved in the riots had become black. So you can see where this sort of racism comes from, and that's why I sort of wanted to bring this in. Obviously, I could come in and talk about Prevent and things like this, but I'm sure you all know people who have been through this sort of, who have been engaged by this strategy, may have been stopped and searched and things like that. So this is where, for me, you know, your racism comes from. It's coming from the top down. I mean, we can see it from sort of the press regularly, you know, Theresa May, the Prevent strategy and so on, and stop and search. So it's something that comes from the top down, and it comes with its purpose to divide ordinary people. And that's what we really need to focus on when we're tackling racism, because the racist ideas that we see on the street, in terms of these, the ones they push, have come from somewhere. Believe it or not, they're not that clever. They don't just dream up these, you know, magical ideas that, you know, Muslims are problems or black people are such, you know, it comes from the top and then they work with that. Okay, so this, the top right is the Kebede rally. In fact, three of those photos are the top, that one and those two are the Kebede. The Kebede demonstration. Does anyone want to tell me what they know about Kebede? Does anyone have sort of, were you there? Hands up if you was at Kebede. Fantastic. We need more of you out when they come to town. Okay, so this is Kebede. Kebede came to Newcastle earlier this year under the guise that they were against the Islamification of Britain. Okay, if you look at these flags, that's the National Front at the top left, and on the top right, that's the Golden Dawn flag. Now, they would go in with the guys that they're just against Muslims, they're just against Islam, but believe me, these people are not just against anyone, they are against all people who are non-white. And it's because of that, it's really important that we generate unity amongst each other, and that we protect each other, and we look after each other, okay? Because these don't only hate sort of Muslims, they hate homosexuals, they hate black people, they hate socialists, and they hate plenty of white people if they don't agree with their political beliefs or anything. As you can see in the bottom right there, that's in the most recent demonstration that we organised in the region, and that's in North Shields. And as you can see clearly, the guy there is making a Nazi salute. So what happens is these people will come to a town. They'll come to the town under some sort of guise that they're against something. In North Shields, it was against the immigration centre. They were against refugees. When they came to Newcastle, they came under the guise that they were against Muslims. But basically, they transfer whatever's been fed from the top, and then push it along the bottom to generate the most momentum. So whether you are black, whether you're Muslim, whether you're non-Muslim, you need to be on the streets opposing them. I'm sure you've heard of Mohammed Salim. I'm sure you've heard of Mushin Ahmed in Rotherham. These are people who've been killed through racist murders. And if you look at the ones in Rotherham, these were killed immediately after sort of far-right marches and things. The problem is, when they do march on the streets and there's not a good opposition, the far-right grow in confidence, and that's when we end up with these sorts of tragedies. We are winning in this area, though. I do want to say that. This is some of the photos of just what we've been doing recently in North Shields and Kebede, where we did actually turn out fantastic numbers. And what happened was then in Shotton Colliery, once they found out that we were organising, they cancelled their march. This is 2013. This is immediately after the killing of Lee Rigby. Obviously, they brought a lot onto the streets, using the anti-Islamic racism to stoke up the numbers. And this is them Saturday. So we need to keep up the fight and work together and make sure that whenever they do come out, we get on the streets and we say that they're not welcome in our communities. Thank you.
Oh, what a day, what a day, what a day.